Settle back, breathe deeply, and let the soft sands of time guide you into a world where history moves slowly, like the Nile drifting beneath a pastel dawn. Tonight, we journey into an ancient realm glittering with divinity and drenched in secrets, the private, often unsettling world of Egypt's pharaohs. But before we step across the threshold of 3,000 years ago, I'd love to imagine where you are listening from, whether it's late at night, early morning, or somewhere in between. This is a whispered kind of story, best heard in quiet moments. If this soothing blend of mystery and history brings you peace, feel free to linger here often. Now, close your eyes, if you wish, and picture a landscape carved by eternity. Smooth dunes stretch toward the horizon like sleeping beasts, while in the distance, the Nile glows with molten gold, winding through groves of palm and sycamore. Rising above this serene world are structures that defy age, temples with colossal pylons, tombs etched with star maps, obelisks gleaming under the unblinking sun. This was Egypt, an empire that endured longer than almost any civilization on Earth, from around 3100 BCE until 30 BCE. It thrived on the rhythmic pulse of the Nile, whose yearly flood nourished fields of wheat and flax and turned desert dust into a paradise of order and abundance. Agriculture blossomed, cities rose, systems of writing and mathematics matured with astonishing precision, and a culture centered on cosmic balance shaped every breath of daily life. Yet at the heart of this flourishing kingdom stood a figure both magnificent and unnerving, the pharaoh. These rulers were not merely kings or queens. To their people, they were living gods, bridges between heaven and earth, embodiments of divine order, protectors of cosmic equilibrium. The Egyptians believed that as long as the pharaoh performed sacred duties with unwavering accuracy, the sun would rise, the Nile would flood, and the world would remain whole. But behind the shimmering mask of divinity, the truth of a pharaoh's life was far more complicated and far darker. Our journey begins by glimpsing their world not through the grand public rituals carved on temple walls, but through the quiet, intimate moments that reveal the burdens and obsessions they carried. Moments that remind us that the price of being worshipped is often as heavy as the crown itself. Imagine dawn breaking across the ancient city of Waset, later known as Thebes. As the first sliver of sunlight spills across the palace roofs, musicians with delicate harps perform gentle melodies meant to awaken the god. Servants move barefoot through incense-laced corridors, carrying trays of fruits, lotus infusions, and sweetbreads for the morning meal. In a chamber perfumed with myrrh, the pharaoh begins the day-long transformation from human to divine figure. Servants meticulously shave every strand of hair, ensuring purity and preventing pests. Thick coal and crushed malachite are applied beneath the eyes not only for beauty, but for spiritual protection. Oils pressed from blue lotus and cinnamon are massaged into the skin until it gleams. Then comes the regalia, layered linen as white as river foam, gold bracelets shaped like coiled serpents, and finally a crown, its form changing depending on the rituals of the day. The white crown for Upper Egypt, red for Lower Egypt, or the combined double crown symbolizing the unity of both lands. Each piece carries cosmic significance. Nothing is worn casually. Even now, as he steps into the palace courtyard, the pharaoh is expected to walk with deliberate purpose. He must enter doorways with his right foot, utter certain protective phrases at thresholds, and avoid allowing his shadow to touch certain holy objects. Every detail, from the tilt of his head to the direction he turns, is governed by ritual. The world rests on his precision. His first stop is often the inner sanctuary of a major temple. Unlike later depictions imagining priests performing all rites, ancient Egyptians believed only the pharaoh truly fed the gods. He presents incense, water, and miniature figurines of himself, meant to symbolically multiply his offerings. Priests chant to amplify his presence, but the rituals are tied directly to his soul. If he falters, the gods may withhold blessings. By midday, the divine king shifts from sacred rites to earthly rule. He sits upon gilded thrones to hear disputes about irrigation canals, boundary conflicts, grain rations, and trade agreements. The vizier, his highest advisor, reads petitions aloud, while scribes record every detail in meticulous hieroglyphic script. The pharaoh rarely reveals emotion during these sessions. To remain impartial is to maintain eternal balance. Anger could bring divine imbalance. Joy could seem frivolous. A god does not laugh, a god decrees. Yet behind the stillness lies an undercurrent of tension. Rivals lurk in every hall. Courtiers whisper for influence. Wives maneuver behind veils of perfumes and politeness. Even the royal children, raised in marble-floored nurseries, become instruments in political games that can turn deadly. To the people, the palace is a place of light, but within its walls, ambition grows like vines in shadow. In the late afternoon, the pharaoh may emerge again, this time in grand procession. Draped in shimmering fabrics, he rides in a gilded chariot through the city as crowds cheer. Children toss garlands of lotus blossoms, and priests burn incense from bronze censers. These appearances reassure the people that divine order remains intact. But despite the public adoration, the pharaoh is never truly free. Even his leisure, hunting lions, playing the board game Senate, or drifting along the Nile on pleasure barges, is weighted with symbolic meaning. Every action is observed, every moment is part of a cosmic performance. And always, lingering at the edge of thought, is the greatest obsession of all: death. Not as an ending, but as the ultimate test. The afterlife is a realm full of trials, monsters, gates, spells, and judgment. A pharaoh spends nearly his entire reign preparing for it. Tombs must be carved, spells inscribed, treasures acquired, priests paid, statues consecrated. Nothing can be left to chance. Immortality must be constructed. As evening falls and musicians once again fill the palace with gentle sounds, the pharaoh retires to his private chambers. He is still a god, still a ruler, still a symbol of cosmic balance. But beneath the heavy layers of ritual, he remains something surprisingly fragile. A person trapped in a role too enormous for any mortal to bear. This is only the beginning of our journey into the shadows beneath the golden crown.
Royal houses and dangerous bonds. Night has passed over ancient Waset, and the kingdom breathes in the pale light of dawn. But in the heart of the palace, beneath courtyards filled with lotus pools and painted pillars, the most dangerous theater in Egypt unfolds. Not in the temples or battlefields, but within the royal household itself. Here, behind walls of shimmering limestone, the lives of the pharaoh's wives, children, and relatives are woven into a tapestry of ambition, jealousy, and carefully preserved secrecy. To the outside world, the palace appears serene, gardens filled with flowering acacia, corridors lined with cedar beams, perfumed fountains where herons rest. But the people living inside these gilded halls understand a truth the common folk cannot fathom. The closer you are to the throne, the more precarious your footing becomes. Let us step quietly into this world of silks, hieroglyphs, and hushed conversations. The great royal wife, more than a queen. Every pharaoh's household centered around one woman, the great royal wife. She was not merely the king's partner, but the female counterpart to his divinity, often depicted beside him on temple walls, offering flowers to gods, whispering prayers, and performing rituals that ensured the fertility of the land. Her titles were endless. She who sees Horus and Set, the great of praises, mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt, beloved of the two lands. She was meant to stand beside the pharaoh as a stabilizing force, but her role was far from ceremonial. The queen's influence extended across the palace, priesthood, and diplomatic sphere. She presided over festivals, received foreign dignitaries, and managed the sprawling network of women, servants, and guards in the royal harem. But her greatest responsibility, perhaps the most perilous, was to provide an heir. Because in Egypt, a royal baby was not just a child. He, or sometimes she, was a living extension of divine order. And that meant everyone in the palace watched the queen very, very closely. The harem, a serene battlefield. The word harem evokes thoughts of leisure, but in Egypt it was closer to a storm beneath still waters. The royal harem, known as the Kenner, housed hundreds of women, secondary wives, priestesses, singers, foreign princesses sent as gifts, and daughters of noble families eager for influence. These women lived with outward harmony. They shared meals, wove linen, tended gardens, and played musical instruments. But behind gentle smiles and polite greetings simmered a competition so intense it shaped the future of the nation. For each woman had one unspoken ambition: to birth a child who might become the next ruler. A single pregnancy had the power to elevate a woman from obscurity to Queen Mother, the most influential position in all of Egypt. And so alliances formed in secret chambers, whispered rumors undermined rivals, and occasional accidents were never truly accidents at all. Even the servants walked carefully, for aligning with the wrong woman could cost them everything, including their lives. Sibling marriages, the divine paradox. One of the most bewildering aspects of the royal household to modern minds is the tradition of incestuous marriage. But to the Egyptians, it was not taboo, it was sacred. Their gods had married one another since the dawn of creation. Osiris wed his sister Isis. Set wed his sister Nephthys. Shu married his twin Tefnut. The royal family believed that to imitate the gods was to preserve divine purity. A pharaoh might marry his sister, half-sister, or even daughter, not from desire, but from duty. Yet beneath this religious rationale lay a complicated emotional landscape. Imagine being raised with a sibling who would one day become your spouse. Imagine watching your father marry your sister because tradition demanded it. Imagine children born into tangled branches of a family tree that looped back onto itself. Some rulers bore the consequences. We see it in the bones of Tutankhamun, whose frail body and congenital conditions reveal the genetic cost of such unions. To the ancient Egyptians, these marriages preserved holiness. To us, they reveal the heavy price of living as a god. Hatred behind the curtains, rival queens. The royal wife's greatest rivals often lived just a courtyard away. In some palaces, women reportedly scratched messages onto ostraka, broken pottery shards, recording grievances, curses, and prayers for their children's ascension. One of the fiercest rivalries whispered through Egyptian history is that between two of Ramses II's wives, Nefertari, the famed beauty, and Isit-Neferet, whose son was heir apparent. Their struggle for influence shaped decisions that rippled through the empire. Nefertari built diplomatic connections with foreign queens, sending gifts and letters written in elegant hieroglyphics. Isit-Neferet strengthened her relationships with priests and military leaders. Each woman adorned herself in jewels and scents meant to captivate the pharaoh's attention, not simply from love, but because a moment of favor could shift the future. This may sound petty by modern standards, but in ancient Egypt, being seen by the king, being chosen, meant safety, status, and security for one's children. Every gesture mattered. A lingering glance, a whispered word, a seat closer to the pharaoh at dinner, a better chamber assignment. The palace was a chessboard, and every queen a calculating player. Children raised in a storm. The royal children, dozens of them, lived in a world that was part paradise, part pressure cooker. They received elite tutoring from scribes, trained in warfare by generals, and learned rituals from priests. They slept on linen sheets embroidered with protective spells, and nursemaids hovered over them like guardian spirits. But childhood did not shield them from political storms. A prince from one mother might be favored today, only to be overshadowed by another mother's child next year. Alliances shifted, threats emerged, even siblings became rivals as soon as they reached adolescence. One wrong word, one misstep, could land a young prince in disfavor, or worse. Some children disappeared from records entirely, erased as if they had never lived. Whether by illness, court intrigue, or deliberate removal, historians can only guess. The pharaoh's private burden. Amid this labyrinth of affection and ambition, the pharaoh stands at the center, eyes always lowered in the presence of gods, back always straight before his people, but heart weighed down by the demands of those closest to him. He must navigate. Wives seeking influence, priests whispering dangers, sons preparing for power, foreign princes watching for weakness, nobles maneuvering for control within the palace. To the outside world, he is a god, but in his private chambers, surrounded by people who want things from him, he is simply a man with too many expectations placed upon his shoulders. And every decision he makes carries consequences far beyond his family, consequences that can shake the foundations of Egypt itself. As we leave the dimly lit palace corridors behind, we prepare to follow the pharaoh into another realm of power, one where divinity, ritual, and cosmic order intertwine in ways both beautiful and unsettling. If you're ready to continue our journey,
The Pharaoh as living God, between earth and eternity. To understand the Pharaoh's world, we must step into a realm where the separation between mortal and divine was almost non-existent. A place where kings did not merely rule by the gods' permission, but as gods themselves. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was believed to be the beating heart of the cosmos. Without him, the sun might not rise, the Nile might not flood. Chaos, Isfet, could spill across the world like a dark tide. Every ritual, every gesture he made was woven into a delicate cosmic tapestry. Let us explore what it meant to live each day as a living God, bearing the weight of the universe on one's shoulders. A body made sacred. For the Egyptians, the pharaoh's body was not simply flesh and bone, it was divine material, infused with celestial essence. His limbs were described as gold, his bones as iron, his hair as lapis lazuli, and his breath as the fragrance of incense. This divine physiology wasn't just poetry, it shaped how the king lived. To ensure nothing impure touched his skin, the pharaoh bathed several times a day in water drawn from sacred pools. A team of priests blessed the water with recitations from ancient texts, stirring in lotus petals, thought to calm the gods. Barbers shaved every hair from his body using obsidian blades. Even a single missed strand was thought to invite spiritual corruption. Perfume makers mixed oils in alabaster jars, blending resins from far-off lands. These oils were gently massaged into the pharaoh's skin, not just for fragrance, but as spiritual armor, keeping demons, curses, and malevolent forces at bay. All of this meant that the pharaoh's daily grooming wasn't luxury, it was survival. Clothing that carried the universe. Even his garments carried profound meanings. The fluid lines of his linen robe symbolized the unending flood of the Nile. The pleats mirrored rippling water. The blue and gold collar, heavy upon his shoulders, represented the sky goddess Nut, arching protectively over the earth. Above all rested the crown, sometimes tall and white, sometimes red and ridged, sometimes both merged in one towering emblem of unity. Each crown was a cosmic statement, announcing his dominion over the two lands and the two worlds, the world of the living and the world of the gods. Only he was permitted to wear them. Only he was strong enough, spiritually and politically, to bear their meaning. The temple rituals, feeding the gods. At sunrise, the pharaoh journeyed to the temple whose sacred precincts only the highest-ranked priests could enter. But even the priests were merely assistants. The pharaoh alone had the right to attend to the gods directly. Each morning, in a dark sanctuary lit only by flickering oil lamps, a ceremony unfolded. First came the opening of the shrine, in which the priest-king gently cracked open the sealed doors, protecting the sacred statue of the deity. These statues weren't mere decorations. Egyptians believed each figure housed a fragment of the god's spirit. The moment the doors opened, incense curled into the still air, carrying prayers upward. The pharaoh would cleanse the statue with water, dress it in new linens, adorn it with gold, present trays of food, flowers, and incense, speak ritual words awakening the god. This wasn't worship in the modern sense, it was maintenance, cosmic maintenance. If the god was neglected, the world itself could unravel. The pharaoh's presence kept harmony alive. Without him, the boundary between life and chaos trembled. Pharaoh as warrior of light. The pharaoh was not only a priest, he was the earthly vessel of divine wrath. When enemies threatened Egypt, they weren't seen as mere political actors. They were embodiments of Isfet, the disorder that battled against truth and cosmic balance. Thus, when the pharaoh crushed rebels or foreign invaders, it wasn't just war, it was myth enacted in real time. Just as the sun god Ra battled the chaos serpent Apep each night, so too did the pharaoh struggle against human and spiritual forces threatening Egypt's stability. A victory in battle meant more than strategic triumph. It meant reaffirming the triumph of light over shadow. Thus kings were shown on temple walls smiting enemies, an image as symbolic as it was political. Endless rituals, endless responsibility. From dawn to dusk, the pharaoh performed rituals that sustained the delicate balance between order and chaos. He offered incense to the gods, oversaw festivals, and read sacred texts meant to empower the kingdom's protective deities. Even meals followed sacred rules. He never ate pork, considered ritually unclean. He avoided fish on certain days. He tasted wine only if blessed by priests. Every bite, every sip, every breath needed to honor the gods. Imagine living every moment with the knowledge that a single mistake, a mispronounced prayer, a poorly timed offering, even a moment of doubt might doom your kingdom. The pharaoh walked a tightrope suspended over cosmic chaos, and he walked it alone. The weight of being divine. Yet for all their pomp and ceremony, the pharaohs were still human beings. They laughed, grieved, loved, and doubted. They feared illness and betrayal. They felt the ache of aging bones and the sting of loss. But unlike ordinary people, they could not show weakness, not even to their families. When a pharaoh fell sick, priests gathered to hide the truth from the public. If he limped, he was carried. If he shook with fever, he was veiled behind curtains. If he aged, his portrait remained forever young, carved with perfect muscles and divine poise. The myth of perfection had to endure. If the people saw their god falter, the very fabric of the world might be seen as shaking. And so, even as mortality gnawed at them, the pharaohs maintained the illusion of heaven on earth. Dreams, messages from the beyond. Night brought no rest from divine burdens. Egyptians believed dreams were direct messages from gods, ancestors, or spirits. When a pharaoh slept, he drifted into a realm thick with symbolism. He might dream of lions, symbols of power, or crocodiles, omens of betrayal, or collapsing temples, warnings of political instability. Scribes trained in dream interpretation waited for him each morning, their task to decode fate itself. These dreams guided decisions, launching wars, commissioning temples, choosing heirs. A single symbol in the pharaoh's sleep could change the fate of millions. In the quiet dark of his chamber, he wasn't only a ruler, he was a messenger between worlds. The invisible burden. To be a pharaoh was to walk between realms, wearing crowns heavy with spiritual meaning. It was to serve as the fulcrum upon which the universe balanced. It was to live a life of breathtaking grandeur, shadowed by endless responsibility. No wonder they built tombs bigger than cities. No wonder they craved immortality. Their deaths were not simply endings. They were transformations, metamorphoses, ascensions. But death also revealed their darkest practices, beliefs that turned fear into ritual, turning people into offerings, and tombs into vast underground kingdoms. We will explore that haunting world next. Tombs, eternity, and the obsession with death. As the sun slips beneath the western horizon, the ancient Egyptians believed that the world transitioned into a place of shadows, a realm ruled by spirits, dangers, and the unseen. For the pharaoh, this daily descent of the sun echoed the journey he himself would one day take into the afterlife. Life, for the king, was only the first act. Death was the masterpiece he spent his entire reign preparing for. This part of our story leads us into the depths of ancient tombs, where silence hangs heavy and eternity begins. A pharaoh's greatest construction, his burial realm. The grandest monuments of Egypt, the pyramids of the Old Kingdom, the painted rock-cut tombs of the New Kingdom, and the sprawling mortuary temples along the Nile were all created for a single purpose: to ensure the pharaoh's eternal survival. For ordinary people, a simple tomb with a few offerings might suffice. But for a pharaoh, death was an undertaking on an unimaginable scale. It involved teams of stonecutters, armies of laborers, artisans who worked for decades, priests who prepared spells, architects who calculated every angle with cosmic precision. Every pharaoh knew the moment he ascended the throne that the clock had begun ticking. His tomb would be the measure of his reign. A small or rushed tomb risked his soul's annihilation. A great one ensured immortality. Thus began the race against time. The West, land of the dead. The Egyptians aligned their tombs and mortuary temples on the west bank of the Nile, for they believed the west was where the sun died each evening, before rising again. To be buried in the west was to follow the sun god on his nightly voyage. When a pharaoh died, his soul embarked on the same journey the sun took through the dark underworld, the Duat, a place filled with gates, monsters, gods, and trials. The tomb was not just housing for a body. It was a map, a guidebook, a weapons cache, a spiritual fortress. Let us step deeper inside. The tomb's layout mirrored the cosmos. They were not random tunnels, but symbolic landscapes representing the universe itself. Common features included the descending corridor, a long passage leading downward, symbolizing the pharaoh's descent into the underworld. The well shaft, a protective pit meant to trap evil spirits and prevent tomb robbers from reaching the burial chamber. The antechambers, rooms containing jars of oils, statues, furniture, chariots, and sometimes pets, everything needed in eternity. The burial chamber, the most sacred space, where the sarcophagus rested in a chamber painted with celestial ceilings representing the night sky. Magical doorways, false doors carved with spells, allowing the king's spirit to pass between worlds. The walls were covered with scenes from the Book of the Dead, Book of Gates, Amduat, and other sacred texts. These weren't mere decorations, they were instructions for the king's soul to survive the trials ahead. Every chamber, every painting, every statue was a magical tool. The guards of the underworld. The afterlife was not peaceful, not at first. It was fraught with dangers. As the deceased pharaoh journeyed through the Duat, he faced serpents with burning venom, giant demons with knives, lakes of fire, beasts that devoured the unworthy, gates guarded by monsters who demanded passwords. The Egyptians believed that if the king forbade even one spell, even one phrase, even one gesture, the forces of chaos would claim him. His soul would dissolve into nothingness. The tomb's inscriptions were his manual. Without them, immortality was impossible. Mummification, the art of eternal flesh. To journey into eternity, the king needed a preserved body. This led to the profound art of mummification, a practice perfected over centuries. The goal wasn't just to prevent decay, it was to transform the king into something divine. His body became the home of the Ka, a spiritual double that required a physical form to inhabit. The process took 70 days and included removing internal organs. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were dried, wrapped, and placed in canopic jars protected by 4 guardian gods. The heart was left in place, for it would be weighed in the afterlife. The brain was discarded. Egyptians believed thought came from the heart. Purification with natron salt. The body was dried until even moisture could not escape. Anointing with oils and resins. These preserved the skin and gave the body a godlike scent. Stuffing with reeds, linen, or sawdust to restore shape and beauty. Wrapping in hundreds of linen strips. Priests recited spells over each layer. Amulets were inserted between wrappings, each with a specific power. By the end, the king no longer looked human, he looked eternal. The final ritual, opening of the mouth. After the mummy was placed in its coffin, a critical ceremony occurred, the opening of the mouth. Priests touched special instruments to the mummy's lips, eyes, ears, and nostrils. This symbolic act allowed the deceased to breathe again, see again, speak prayers, eat offerings, hear the voices of gods. Without this ritual, the pharaoh would enter the afterlife blind and silent. The ritual transformed him from a corpse into a divine being capable of living forever. The tomb is sealed. After all rites were completed, the sarcophagus was lowered into the chamber. The king might rest inside a granite coffin, within a gilded wooden coffin, inside another coffin, and sometimes even a fourth, layer upon layer of sacred protection. The doorways were blocked with huge stones, passages were filled with rubble, final seals were pressed into clay. Once the tomb was sealed, no living person was meant to enter it again. The pharaoh had begun his eternal journey. He was now alone with the gods. But danger still lurked. Despite all protections, one threat lingered: tomb robbers. These were not random thieves. They were often workers or priests who knew the tomb's secrets. Gold, jewels, and fine oils tempted even the devout. Some robbed tombs mere weeks after burial. This is one reason later pharaohs abandoned pyramids and chose hidden tombs in valleys surrounded by cliffs. But secrecy had a cost. When a tomb remained undiscovered for centuries, its magic remained intact, but its king was forgotten by the world of the living. To the Egyptians, oblivion was the second death, far worse than the first. Toward the Hall of Judgment. At last, we arrive at the most feared and sacred destination, the weighing of the heart, where the pharaoh stood before Osiris. But that part of the journey, the trial that decided the fate of every soul, king or commoner, belongs to our next chapter.
The Hall of Judgment, where kings trembled. We have followed the pharaoh from palace to temple, from battlefield to tomb. Now we stand before the threshold of eternity, the place where even kings, wrapped in gold and spells, faced the ultimate test. The ancient Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a crossing, a passage into a world where truth, morality, and cosmic order were measured with terrifying precision. In life, the pharaoh was treated as a god. In death, he was judged like any other soul. Let us step into the most sacred chamber of the afterlife, the Hall of Two Truths, where immortality was granted or denied. The journey to the court of Osiris. The deceased king's soul, divided into many aspects like the Ka, Ba, and Ak, traveled through the Duat. After facing gates guarded by spirits and reciting spells from his tomb's inscriptions, he eventually reached a chamber lit by a light not of sun or flame, but of pure divine essence. This was the Hall of Judgment, ruled by Osiris, god of the dead and lord of resurrection. Imagine vast columns shaped like papyrus reeds towering overhead, their tips blooming into stone flowers. The floor gleams like polished obsidian. Along the walls, scenes of divine courts shimmer in gold leaf. This is a courtroom unlike any in the mortal world, silent, vast, sacred. Here, fate is decided. The 42 judges. Osiris does not stand alone. He presides with 42 divine judges, each responsible for a particular sin or moral code. Their names are ancient and obscure, some like He Who Dances in Blood or Devourer of Shadows, but each held authority over a specific moral law. The pharaoh, in all his splendor, must address them one by one, not with confessions, but with denials. This ritual is known as the negative confessions, statements proclaiming one's innocence. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not slain without cause. I have not defiled the waters of the Nile. I have not betrayed the gods. These were not mere words. They were spiritual oaths. If the pharaoh lied, the judges would know. No wealth, no rank, no crown could protect him here. Anubis weighs the heart. After the declarations, the ancient ritual begins. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and guide of souls, steps forward. He carries with him something sacred, the heart of the pharaoh, taken from his body during mummification and preserved because it was believed to be the seat of memory, morality, and identity. The Egyptians believed the heart recorded everything, every thought, every lie, every kindness, every sin. Anubis places the heart on one side of a great golden scale. On the other side lies the feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth, balance, and cosmic order. If the heart is lighter than the feather, the pharaoh is declared pure. If it is heavier, weighted by wrongdoing, cruelty, or imbalance, the consequences are catastrophic. Suddenly, the pharaoh's divinity means nothing. Only the truth of his life matters. The monster who waits, Ammit. Lurking beside the scale is a creature of nightmares, Amit, the devourer. She is part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, the three most dangerous animals in Egypt. She does not torment, she does not punish, she simply ends. If the pharaoh's heart fails the test, Ammit devours it in a single gulp. And what follows is not torture, it is far worse. The soul ceases to exist, erased, forgotten, condemned to oblivion for all eternity. To the Egyptians, this was the most terrifying fate imaginable, worse than physical suffering, worse than hell, worse than being trapped. It was the second death, the death of memory, and this horror awaited even a king. Thoth records the verdict. Standing beside the scale is Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. With the poise of a scribe, he records every detail in his divine scrolls. If the pharaoh passes, Thoth writes his vindication. If he fails, Thoth records his annihilation. Nothing is hidden, nothing is forgiven without balance. Even the pharaoh, who once commanded armies and spoke with gods, is subject to the same law as shepherds and fishermen. This was the ancient Egyptians' profound belief. All souls face truth in the end. If the pharaoh passes, ascension to the stars. If the heart balances perfectly, Osiris rises from his throne. His green skin glows like new life. His white crown gleams beneath the celestial light. He extends his hand toward the pharaoh and declares him Ma-Keru, meaning true of voice. This is a sacred title. It is eternal vindication. What follows is not merely entrance into paradise. The king experiences a transformation. His soul becomes radiant. His body becomes divine energy. He joins the gods in their celestial realm. Some texts say he sails with Ra across the sky, helping him battle the serpent Apep each night. Others say he joins Osiris in the lush, eternal fields known as the Field of Reeds, where crops grow forever and life continues in peaceful perfection. In this paradise, the pharaoh can walk among the gods, eat food made of light, reunite with loved ones, reign as an eternal spirit. He becomes more than memory. He becomes myth. But if his heart fails him, if he ruled cruelly, neglected rituals, oppressed the vulnerable, or disrupted Ma'at, then the pharaoh meets his end in the jaws of Ammit. There is no second chance, no appeal, no divine intervention. The pharaoh dissolves into non-existence. His name fades. His tomb becomes meaningless. To Egyptians, this was the worst fate imaginable, to be forgotten. And so kings spent their lives trying desperately to avoid this annihilation, building monuments, sponsoring temples, honoring rituals, and keeping peace. A forgotten king was a failed king. A devoured heart was a cosmic tragedy. The power of a name. In Egypt, names carried power. To speak a person's name was to keep their soul alive. To erase a name from a wall or monument was to kill them forever. This is why damnatio memoriae, erasing someone's memory, was such a powerful act. We see it in history. Hatshepsut's images were chiseled out. Akhenaten's name was erased from king lists. Rival families removed the legacies of enemies, because to remove a name was to deny eternity. This belief shaped politics, art, war, and even family feuds. The Pharaoh's judgment was a mirror. The Hall of Judgment wasn't just a myth. It was a reflection of Egyptian values: truth over power, balance over chaos, justice over privilege, morality over authority. It reminded Egyptians that even a god-king stood accountable, and that was the beauty and the terror of the afterlife. We now leave the Hall of Judgment behind. The Pharaoh has been weighed, measured, and either erased or exalted. Next, we travel back to the world of the living to witness the rise of legendary kings and queens, their triumphs, their tragedies, and the human truths behind their golden myths.
The rise of legendary pharaohs, power, triumph, and tragedy. We step now out of the mystical chambers of judgment and back into the sweeping landscape of history, into the reigns of the most iconic pharaohs who shaped the identity of Egypt across 3,000 years. Their names echo like thunder across time: Narmer, Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, Ramses the Great. Each wore the double crown, yet each carved a unique destiny. Some glorious, some disastrous, some mysterious enough to perplex us still. Their stories reveal not just the grandeur of Egypt, but the fragile humanity inside those divine masks. Let us wander through their lives, beginning at the dawn of a united kingdom. Narmer, the first unifier. In an age before pyramids, before grand armies, before Egypt was even truly Egypt, a ruler emerged who would reshape the entire land. His name was Narmer. Around 3100 BCE, he unified Upper and Lower Egypt, forging two lands into one kingdom. His name appears on what may be the oldest royal artifact in the world, the Narmer Palette. On that carved slab, he is shown wearing first one crown, then the other, symbolizing his dominion. This was not a peaceful merger. It was the end of a long era of tribal conflict. With unity came stability. With stability came kingship. With kingship came the birth of pharaonic power. Narmer laid the foundation for everything that followed: the pyramids, temples, written language, and more. Without him, there would be no pharaohs at all. Djoser and Imhotep, architects of eternity. A few centuries later, a visionary king and an even more visionary architect changed history again. Djoser, a pharaoh of the third dynasty, wanted a tomb unlike any before. His architect, Imhotep, answered with brilliance: the world's first monumental stone structure, the Step Pyramid. Before this, tombs were low mud brick mastabas. Djoser dreamed bigger. Imhotep stacked mastaba upon mastaba, creating a staircase to the heavens. Each layer, each angle, each chamber symbolized an ascent toward the gods. This innovation inspired the later pyramids at Giza. Imhotep became so revered that he was eventually worshipped as a god of wisdom and healing.
The first monumental stone building in human history came not from Greece or Mesopotamia, but from Egypt, under the guidance of a pharaoh whose ambition touched the sky. Khufu, the pyramid and the power. Of all the ancient rulers, Khufu casts one of the largest shadows, quite literally. His Great Pyramid, completed around 2560 BCE, remains one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But who was the man behind the monument? Ancient Greek historians portrayed him as cruel. Egyptian records are more ambiguous. We know he commanded immense resources, labor, and technical precision. His pyramid required astrophysical alignment, flawless engineering, and millions of limestone blocks placed with impossible accuracy. He wasn't just building a tomb. He was building a statement. Pharaoh is eternal. Egypt is eternal. Order is eternal. His monument still stands as proof. Hatshepsut, the woman who became king. Centuries later rose one of Egypt's most extraordinary rulers, a woman who crowned herself king. Her name, Hatshepsut. She ruled not as queen consort, but as pharaoh, wearing the false beard, the kilt, and the crowns traditionally reserved for men. Her rise was controversial. She stepped in when her stepson, Thutmose III, was too young to rule, and then she simply kept the throne. But rather than plunging Egypt into turmoil, she ushered in an era of prosperity, stability, artistic explosion, architectural brilliance.
Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is one of the most stunning structures in the world, a terraced masterpiece carved into cliffs. She expanded trade, sending expeditions to the fabled land of Punt. She commissioned obelisks taller than any before. She proved that the throne did not belong only to men, it belonged to those bold enough to claim it. Thutmose III, the Conqueror. If Hatshepsut was Egypt's diplomat and builder, her stepson Thutmose III became its warrior. After taking the throne following her death, he unleashed a series of military campaigns that expanded Egyptian territory farther than ever before. He was called the Napoleon of Egypt, but truly, Napoleon should be called the Thutmose of France. He led 17 military campaigns, sieges across Canaan, battles in Syria, conquests that brought tribute from foreign kings. His empire stretched from the Euphrates to Nubia. He was fearless, cunning, and ruthlessly strategic. Together, Hatshepsut and Thutmose III created a golden age, one through diplomacy, the other through domination. Akhenaten, the heretic king. Then came a ruler who shattered tradition so dramatically that Egypt never fully recovered. His name was Akhenaten, and he nearly brought Egypt's religion and political system to collapse. He rejected the worship of many gods and exalted a single deity, the sun disk Aten. He closed temples, banned old practices, and moved the capital to a brand new city in the desert, Akhetaten. His reign was unlike any other. Art suddenly shifted to elongated, exaggerated forms. Royal scenes showed affection and emotion, unheard of before. Religious texts became poetic hymns to the sun. To many, he was a visionary. To others, a madman. His reforms weakened Egypt's economy, destabilized foreign relations, and angered the powerful priesthood. After his death, his memory was systematically erased. But he left behind one thing the world still debates: a mysterious, brilliant queen. Nefertiti, beauty and power. Nefertiti was not merely a royal spouse, she was co-ruler, depicted smiting enemies, offering to the Aten, and wearing crowns equal to the king's. Her bust, discovered in 1912, remains one of the most iconic images on Earth. but her end is a mystery. Did she die young? Did she rule alone under a different name? Was she removed from records intentionally? Her disappearance is one of ancient Egypt's deepest enigmas. Tutankhamun, the child who restored the gods. After the chaos of Akhenaten's reign, the throne fell to a child, Tutankhaten, soon renamed Tutankhamun, meaning living image of Amun. He restored old temples, revived the traditional gods, and brought harmony back to Egypt's spiritual world. His reign was short, perhaps 9 years. His death sudden. His body frail, likely due to generations of inbreeding. Yet he became the most famous pharaoh in history. Why? Because his tomb was found nearly intact in 1922, a trove of treasures revealing the staggering wealth of ancient Egypt. His golden mask remains the face of a civilization. And finally, the greatest of them all, Ramesses II, also known as Ramesses the Great. He reigned for 66 years, outliving many of his wives, children, and rivals. He built temples on a scale unmatched, including the colossal Abu Simbel. He led massive battles, including the Battle of Kadesh, one of the earliest recorded military engagements in history. He signed the world's first known peace treaty. He fathered over 100 children. He reshaped Egypt's identity through sheer force of will. He was Pharaoh, magnified to myth. These rulers crafted Egypt's golden legends. They built pyramids, fought wars, reformed religions, and carved their names into eternity. In the next chapter, we explore the darker side of royal rule, treachery, poisoning, conspiracy, and the many ways ambition turned deadly.
Conspiracies, poison, and palace shadows. For all their splendor and divinity, the pharaohs lived under constant threat, not from foreign armies or natural disaster, but from those closest to them. The palace, with its incense-filled halls and gilded ceilings, was far from peaceful. Beneath its calm surfaces seethed ambition, paranoia, and betrayal. It was said that there is no danger greater than family. In Egypt, that saying proved true again and again. The royal courts were sanctuaries of beauty and battlegrounds of secrecy. Let us step into the darker corners of these palaces, where whispers killed more swiftly than blades. A house of many eyes. The pharaoh was the most protected man in Egypt, guarded by elite soldiers, personal physicians, and magical amulets. Yet ironically, the greatest threats came from those he could not guard against: his wives, his sons, his advisors, his high priests, his generals, his scribes. The court was a place where status could rise or fall in an instant, and for many, the path to power passed through someone else's misfortune or death. Assassination attempts, poisonings, and conspiracies lurked behind silken curtains and polite smiles. The harem conspiracy, the plot to kill a king. One of the most chilling events in Egyptian history happened during the reign of Ramesses III, a king who believed himself secure after decades of power. He was wrong. A lesser wife, T, grew desperate. Her son was not chosen as crown prince. To secure the throne for him, she orchestrated a multi-layered scheme involving palace officials, scribes, female attendants, military officers, and even members of the harem itself. Secret messages were written on papyrus and hidden in jars. Bribes were funneled through temple treasuries. Soldiers swore oaths in the shadows. The plan? Murder the pharaoh during a festival, then seize control of the succession. It almost worked. For centuries, historians debated whether the plot succeeded. Then, in 2012, forensic scans of Ramesses III's mummy revealed the truth. His throat had been slit with a sharp blade. The conspirators killed a god. But after the king's death, the plot unraveled. Trials exposed every participant. Many were forced to take their own lives. Others were executed. The conspirators were erased from monuments, condemned to eternal silence. This event showed how fragile even the greatest ruler could be. The poisoner's art. While knives and betrayals made headlines, poison remained the silent weapon of the palace. Egyptians had extensive knowledge of herbs, minerals, and venoms. Some substances used in medicine could also kill. Crushed scorpion tails, poisonous desert berries, lead-based makeup, toxic resins, snake venom mixed with wine. Poison was ideal for palace intrigue, silent, invisible, untraceable in ancient times. A pharaoh falling sick could blame the gods, but his enemies knew better. Some kings died suddenly, their deaths suspiciously convenient. Some queens perished after meals shared with rivals. Some princes died of fevers, only for historians to suspect foul play. Poison was the weapon of those who couldn't wield swords, but could wield influence. The threat of the high priesthood. If the palace was dangerous, the temples were no safer. Egypt's priesthood, particularly in Thebes, amassed wealth that rivaled the pharaoh's own treasury. They controlled land, food, manpower, and ritual power. A high priest could command thousands, and sometimes even armies. Conflicts between kings and priests simmered beneath the surface. Priests withheld support, manipulated omens, influenced succession, stirred rebellions, or quietly undermined rulers they disliked. In one period, the high priests of Amun grew so powerful that they effectively ruled Upper Egypt, reducing pharaohs to symbolic figureheads. Even kings feared the whisper of a priest's curse. The hidden rivalries of princes. The royal children, raised in luxury, often turned into bitter rivals the moment they reached adulthood. With dozens of sons competing for the throne, tension simmered constantly. Common patterns emerged. Brothers turning against brothers. Each prince believed he deserved the crown more than others. Mothers influencing their sons. A mother's ambition could be deadly. Advisors choosing favorites. Some princes gained military backing. Others won over priests. Accidental deaths. Hunting accidents. Sudden illnesses. Falls from chariots. Younger brothers disappearing without explanation. History is littered with royal family members who simply vanished from records, erased to ensure a smooth succession. The queen who ruled from the shadows. While many queens wielded ceremonial influence, some held real power, sometimes dangerously so. One example comes from the Ramesside era. Behind the scenes, a queen mother known as Tuya manipulated political alliances, placed her supporters in temple positions, and ensured that her favored son rose to the throne rather than his older rivals. Her opponents died mysteriously. Political enemies were exiled to distant deserts. Records subtly rewrote history in her favor. Though her story is rarely told in detail, hints of her power appear in inscriptions and administrative records. The most effective political players were often those whose names barely appear. The price of ambition. Every member of the royal household walked a knife's edge. To gain favor was to rise. To lose it was to vanish. The consequences of failure were severe. Executions, forced suicides, exile to distant deserts.
erasure of names from monuments, confiscation of wealth, damnation in the afterlife. Imagine the psychological weight. A prince from one mother awakes each day wondering if today is the day poison slips into his cup. A queen's attendants spy on one another, waiting to report a misstep. A general who shows too much power risks appearing treasonous. A scribe who reads the wrong message might be accused of conspiracy. This was not a peaceful kingdom of gods. It was a kingdom of humans playing divine roles, with all the jealousy, fear, and desperation that comes with it. Yet Egypt endured. Despite countless betrayals, Egypt remained stable for millennia. How? Because its systems, religion, bureaucracy, military, and citizenry were stronger than any individual's ambition. The pharaoh might face plots, the palace might become a battlefield, but the machinery of the kingdom continued. Egypt survived not because its rulers were flawless, but because its culture was astonishingly resilient. Still, the scars of these conspiracies left marks in history, gaps in records, strange successions, erased names. Behind every smooth dynastic transition lay unspoken turmoil. With the palace shadows explored, our journey now turns outward, from internal treachery to the pharaoh's relationship with the natural world, the Nile, the desert, the animals considered sacred, and the forces of nature believed to speak through signs and omens.
Sacred nature, Nile magic, desert spirits, and the Pharaoh's bond with the land. The Kingdom of Egypt was not merely a political entity. It was a living landscape, an environment believed to be filled with divine presence at every turn. To the ancient Egyptians, the natural world was not silent. It whispered, it warned, it blessed, and punished. And the pharaoh, as mediator between humanity and the cosmic forces, was expected to interpret those messages. In this part, we explore the intimate bond between the pharaoh and the land he ruled, the rivers, deserts, winds, animals, and natural phenomena that shaped his reign and his spiritual identity. The Nile, artery of life and divine messenger. No force shaped Egypt more profoundly than the Nile River. Each year, its waters rose and fell with rhythmic precision, bringing nutrients from distant African highlands. Without this annual flood, known as the inundation, Egypt could not survive. The Nile was seen as a god, Hapi, the bringer of abundance. For the pharaoh, the river's behavior reflected his success or failure as a ruler. A high flood meant prosperity. A low flood meant famine and unrest. An excessive flood could destroy homes and fields. Thus, the pharaoh performed rituals to honor Hapi, pouring libations into the river and offering sweet-smelling oils to encourage a gentle rise. Priests kept precise records of flood levels with stone nilometers. If the waters rose too little, the people murmured that the king had displeased the gods. The Nile's voice was gentle, but it wielded power over both grain and political stability. Fields and fertility, the pharaoh as provider. Beyond the river itself, the farmlands stretching along its banks were considered sacred. Farmers believed the pharaoh's spiritual essence infused the soil with vitality. In art, he was depicted presenting sheaves of wheat to the gods, or scattering seeds to signify renewal. If the harvest was plentiful, the pharaoh received praise. If famine struck, the people blamed. Priestly negligence, corrupt officials, or the pharaoh himself. To live as king was to shoulder the yield of every field and the success of every sower. Deserts, realms of spirits and hidden dangers. Beyond the fertile valleys stretched vast oceans of sand, the Red Land, the domain of danger, chaos, and spirits. The desert was ruled by gods like Set, the unpredictable deity associated with storms and war. To most Egyptians, the desert was a place to avoid. To the pharaoh, it was a frontier to control. The desert held gold mines, quarries of limestone and granite, military roads, ancient trails used by nomads. Expeditions into the desert required rituals, protections, and offerings to ward off malevolent forces. Travelers believed that spirits wandered the dunes, lost souls, vengeful ghosts, and creatures unseen by mortal eyes. Pharaohs built way stations, wells, and fortresses to tame these lands. But at night, even soldiers felt the presence of something older than Egypt itself. The desert reminded everyone, even kings, how fragile human life was. Sacred animals, living messengers of the gods. Egyptian culture honored animals not as pets or beasts, but as embodiments of divine powers. Some animals were so sacred that killing one, even accidentally, was punishable by death. For the pharaoh, these creatures served as omens, allies, and symbols. 1. Cats, Mao. Linked to Bastet, goddess of home and protection. Their presence in palaces symbolized harmony. 2. Falcons. Embodiment of Horus, the god associated with kingship. A falcon circling above the pharaoh was viewed as a blessing. 3. Crocodiles. Feared and revered. Sobek, the crocodile god, represented strength and fertility. 4. Ibises. Sacred to Thoth. Their movements near temples were thought to signal divine messages. 5. Bulls. The Apis bull, chosen for special markings, was worshipped as a living manifestation of Ptah. The pharaoh had to treat these creatures with reverence. Their behavior could influence decisions, from farming to war. Celestial omens, the sky as divine script. The heavens were a vast canvas of meaning. Pharaohs consulted star priests who interpreted movements in the sky. A meteor streaking across the night could signal political upheaval. An eclipse was seen as a cosmic warning. The rising of Sirius, the star of Isis, marked the flooding of the Nile. Temples were aligned to stars. Monuments cast shadows marking solstices. Obelisks were designed to catch the first rays of dawn. The pharaoh was believed to ascend to the sky after death, becoming a star. The constellations were not distant, they were ancestors. Thus, the pharaoh watched the sky for guidance as keenly as he watched foreign envoys. Winds, storms, and the breath of the gods. Wind was more than weather. It was the breath of the gods. The north wind brought cool relief from the desert heat. The hot south wind brought sandstorms and sickness. When violent winds swept across the land, priests interpreted them as warnings of divine displeasure, impending conflict, or changes in leadership. A pharaoh's advisors tracked wind patterns, storms, and unusual weather as carefully as military intelligence. In Egyptian thought, nothing in nature was random. Rituals of renewal, the king and the land. Several times a year, the pharaoh performed rituals that bound him to the natural world. 1. The Heb-Sed Festival, a rejuvenation ceremony after 30 years of rule where the pharaoh ran a symbolic race to prove vitality. If he stumbled, it was a bad omen. 2. Plowing the first furrow, symbolizing the renewal of the agricultural cycle. The pharaoh guided the plow as priests chanted blessings. 3. The Opet Festival, held in Thebes, connecting the king to a moon. The god's statues traveled along the Nile in a procession of boats. 4. Nile offerings. Priests and the king cast offerings into the waters, lotus petals, incense, and tiny gold figurines. These ceremonies reinforced the belief that the king and the land were spiritually intertwined. If the pharaoh weakened, the land weakened. Natural disasters, the pharaoh's greatest fear. Droughts, plagues, locust swarms, and crop failures were interpreted as cosmic distress signals. When disaster struck, the pharaoh fasted, offered sacrifices, purified temples, consulted dream interpreters, sought advice from star priests. Some kings launched massive construction projects after famines to restore balance. Others built reservoirs or canals to prevent future crises. A pharaoh unable to restore harmony risked rebellion and the judgment of the gods. Harmony and responsibility. Nature, to the Egyptians, was both benevolent and dangerous, a giver of life and a source of chaos. The pharaoh's divine duty was to keep balance, to prevent chaos from gaining ground. Every rustle of reeds, every ripple of the Nile, every cry of a sacred animal was part of a cosmic symphony he was expected to understand. The land was his kingdom, but it was also his teacher, and sometimes his judge. In the next chapter, we shift from the natural world to the world of magic, curses, and forbidden knowledge, realms the pharaohs relied upon more than we often realize.
Magic, curses, and forbidden knowledge. We now cross a threshold into one of the most mesmerizing aspects of ancient Egypt, a world where magic was not superstition, but a structured, sacred science born from thousands of years of belief. To the Egyptians, magic was woven into the fabric of reality itself. They called it Heka, a fundamental force present in every breath, every prayer, every flicker of a flame. For the pharaoh, Heka was not optional, it was essential. Behind the rituals we've seen, the offerings, the burial rites, the coronations, lay an intricate system of spells, incantations, amulets, and symbols designed to protect the king from dangers seen and unseen. Let us now explore this unseen realm, where even gods consulted spellbooks, and kings carried magic like warriors carried swords. Heka, the divine power behind all things. Unlike modern understandings of magic as fantasy, Heka was considered as real as gravity. It existed before the gods themselves, and even deities used it to shape the world. The pharaoh, born as the earthly conduit of divine power, commanded Heka more directly than any mortal. He used it to sanctify rituals, defeat spiritual enemies, strengthen his authority, protect the land, preserve his soul after death. Priests were trained in Heka as scholars train in mathematics. No ritual was performed without the correct spell, gesture, or intonation. To misuse Heka, or to neglect it, risked cosmic imbalance. The secret house of life. Deep within temple complexes existed hidden chambers known as the Pharaonic, or House of Life. These were ancient libraries of scrolls, papyri, manuals, spells, astronomical charts, medical texts, dream interpretations, rituals for invoking or banishing spirits. Access was strictly limited. Only select priests and scribes trained for decades could read these scripts. Within these rooms were spells that protected kings from poisons, shielded palaces from curses, allowed spirits to be summoned, ensured the sun god's victory over darkness, opened the mouths of statues, and guided the dead through the underworld. Some texts were so dangerous that they were kept in sealed chests, opened only during emergencies. Pharaohs consulted the House of Life during crises, famine, plague, rebellion, not for superstition, but for sacred wisdom. Amulets, weapons of protection. Pharaohs adorned themselves with powerful amulets crafted from precious stones. Each had a specific purpose. 1. The Ankh, symbol of life itself, worn during coronations and funerals. 2. The Wadjet Eye, protection against curses and illness, often placed over the heart during mummification. 3. The Scarab, linked to Khepri, the dawn guard, used to ensure rebirth each morning. 4. The Djed Pillar, symbol of spinal strength and stability, placed at the base of sarcophagi. 5. The Shen Ring, infinity symbol, guaranteed a king's eternal dominion. These were not accessories, they were spiritual armor. A pharaoh venturing into battle or performing sacred rituals never appeared without layers of enchanted protection. Curses, protection, not punishment. Hollywood depicts Egyptian curses as deadly traps waiting for tomb robbers, but true ancient curses were far more complex and usually defensive, not vengeful. They often warned,
May he who harms this tomb lose his name. May his Ka wander without rest. May the serpent coil around his heart. Such curses weren't meant to kill intruders with dramatic plagues. They threatened something far more feared by Egyptians: eternal erasure. To lose one's name was to lose existence. To wander without rest was to be denied paradise. Curses were scripts embedded into tomb walls, statues, and coffins to frighten or spiritually disable those who dared disturb sacred spaces. Oracles and prophecy. In times of uncertainty, pharaohs consulted oracles, sacred mediums believed to channel divine will. The most famous were the Oracle of Amun at Siwa, oracles at Karnak and Luxor, statues believed to speak through subtle movements. Processions carried god statues through temples. When asked questions, the priests, guided by the god's spirit, tilted the statues forward or backward to indicate yes or no. These answers influenced warfare, diplomacy, trials, succession, temple construction, and political strategy. Pharaohs claimed divine insight, but often, behind curtains, priests shaped decisions with quiet influence. Dream magic, messages in the night. Dreams were considered sacred conversations with gods and the dead. Pharaohs recorded their dreams in temple inscriptions and consulted specialized dream interpreters. A dream of a rising sun meant victory. A dream of collapsing pillars meant betrayal. A dream of crocodiles could signal threats at the borders. One of the most famous dreams belonged to Thutmose IV, who slept near the Great Sphinx and dreamed the stone colossus spoke to him. "Clear the sand from my body, and I will make you king." He did so, and soon after, he indeed became pharaoh. Dreams were not illusions, they were royal directives. Protective rituals and nightly battles. Egyptian priests performed nightly rituals to ensure the survival of the world. At sunset, Ra entered the underworld to fight the chaos serpent Apep. If the sun failed to rise, it meant Apep had won. Rituals included stabbing effigies of Apep, burning wax models, reciting anti-chaos spells, smashing clay serpents, drawing protective eyes on papyri. Pharaohs often participated in symbolic versions of these battles. In their eyes, every sunrise was a divine victory. Baneful magic, forbidden but real. Though Heka was considered a natural force, its misuse was feared and punished. Forbidden magic included love spells used to manipulate, death spells targeting rivals, hexes cast on officials, curses inscribed on clay dolls. Such practices were treason if used against royalty. One court record from the New Kingdom describes a scribe imprisoned for crafting a wax figure of the pharaoh and piercing it with needles, an act intended to spiritually weaken him. Even attempting such magic was a death sentence. The pharaoh's household was often filled with protective spells to guard against these invisible dangers. Magic in everyday life. Even beyond palace walls, magic infused every aspect of Egyptian life. People wore amulets, placed protective figurines at thresholds, and whispered protective prayers at night. But for the pharaoh, magic wasn't occasional, it was constant. Every action he took was framed by Heka. His crown was enchanted, his throne inscribed with protective names, his chariot carved with spells. His sandals depicted his enemies beneath his feet, his meals blessed by priests, his palace guarded by protective murals. A king without magic was no king at all. The pharaoh as the supreme magician. Ultimately, the pharaoh was the master of Heka. He commanded gods with his voice. He energized temples with rituals. He protected Egypt with spells and sacred power. He wasn't merely a political leader, he was a magical one, a living nexus where divine power met human responsibility. And yet, even with all this magic, no pharaoh could escape the inevitable decline of the kingdom itself, because every civilization, no matter how divine, meets its sunset, and Egypt's would come slowly, tragically, and unavoidably. The sunset of an empire and the immortality of the pharaohs. Every kingdom has a dawn, a golden noon, and eventually, however reluctant, a twilight. Egypt's civilization lasted longer than almost any other on earth. For 3,000 years pharaohs governed, priests chanted, scribes wrote, and farmers prayed to the Nile's rhythm. Yet even an empire blessed by gods could not escape the forces of time, ambition, invasion, and internal fracture. The great monuments remained, but the power behind them dimmed. In this final chapter, we walk through the slow, dignified, sometimes turbulent decline of the pharaohs, and how, in an unexpected way, their legacy grew even more powerful after their fall. Weakening crowns and waning influence. After the splendor of the new kingdom, when rulers like Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ramses II shaped history, the structure of pharaonic authority began to loosen. Several forces converged. 1. The priests of Amun became too powerful. Their wealth rivaled the crown. Their temples grew into economic giants. Their influence reached every household. Soon, kings relied on priests more than priests relied on kings. 2. Internal corruption spread. Officials siphoned grain. Scribes altered records. Governors acted independently. The chain of command began to fray. 3. Economic decline. Long-distance trade routes weakened. Gold from Nubia slowed. Construction projects became smaller and less ambitious. A kingdom that once commanded international respect now struggled to feed its people. The Sea Peoples and Foreign Threats. Around 1200 BCE, Egypt faced invasions from mysterious groups collectively called the Sea Peoples, raiders who swept across the Mediterranean like a storm. Egypt fought bravely. Ramses III defeated them in a massive battle depicted on the walls of Medina Tabu. But even victory drained resources. Armies cost money, and temples demanded offerings. Egypt survived, but not unscarred. Libyan and Nubian dynasties. As central power weakened, foreign groups rose within Egypt. Libyan rulers, descendants of Libyan mercenaries, settled in the delta, eventually seized the throne. They ruled competently, but lacked the old prestige. Nubian pharaohs. Later, the kingdom to the south, Nubia, grew strong enough to conquer Egypt. The Nubian 25th dynasty revitalized religious traditions, restored temples, and saw themselves as protectors of Egypt's ancient ways. For a moment, Egypt's old spirit flickered again, but external forces continued to tighten around the kingdom. The Assyrians, empire meets empire. In the 7th century BCE, the Assyrian Empire, brutal, disciplined, and militarily advanced, invaded Egypt. Their armies crushed what remained of Egypt's defenses. They installed puppet kings, stripped territories, and weakened Egypt's authority even further. The pharaohs were no longer the unchallenged rulers of a vast land. They were struggling monarchs caught in the machinery of global politics. Persian conquest, a foreign pharaoh. In 525 BCE, Egypt fell to the Persian Empire. Cambyses II conquered the land and declared himself pharaoh. For the first time, a foreign king wore Egypt's double crown. To many Egyptians, this was unthinkable, a rupture in cosmic order. But life went on. Temples still opened their doors. Scribes still filled papyri with prayers. Farmers still watched the Nile. The pharaoh as a divine figure began to fade, replaced by governors and foreign satraps. Egypt would briefly regain independence, only to lose it again. Alexander the Great and the Greek pharaohs. Everything changed in 332 BCE when Alexander the Great marched into Egypt. Unlike others, he treated Egyptian beliefs with respect. He offered to the gods, restored temples, and declared himself son of Amun. The people accepted him as pharaoh. After his death, Egypt fell to the control of the Ptolemies, a Greek dynasty that adopted Egyptian customs, titles, and rituals. Cleopatra VII, the last of her line, was one of the most brilliant rulers Egypt ever knew. She rose from a world of intrigue. She spoke multiple languages. She restored the economy. She navigated Roman politics with unmatched intelligence. But even she could not stop the inevitable. Rome arrives, the end of pharaohs. When Cleopatra died in 30 BCE, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. The age of pharaohs ended, not with an invasion, not with a famine, but with the quiet shifting of political tides. Rome respected Egyptian religion, even worshipped some gods, but the divine kingship that once sustained the cosmos was gone. Egypt continued, but its heart had changed. The era of pharaohs was over. Yet their legacy became immortal. Ironically, the pharaohs became more famous after their fall than during their rule. For centuries, their monuments stood silent in the desert, guarded by sand and time. Tombs were forgotten, temples buried, statues shattered, but the world rediscovered them. Napoleon's expedition, 1798, brought scholars who documented hieroglyphs and monuments. The Rosetta Stone, 1799, unlocked the ability to read ancient Egyptian writing. Tutankhamun's tomb, 1922, revealed untouched treasures that stunned humanity. Now the world sees pharaohs not as tyrants or distant rulers, but as architects of one of the greatest civilizations in history. Their stories ignite imagination. Their tombs inspire wonder. Their religions reveal profound philosophies about life, death, and cosmic order. Why the pharaohs still matter? Thousands of years later, the pharaohs still speak to us. They teach us about the fragility of power, the burden of responsibility, the beauty of human creativity, the fear of mortality, the longing for eternity. Their monuments remind us that humans, no matter how ancient, dream the same dreams we do. To build, to protect, to lead, to love, to be remembered. The pharaohs achieved their immortality not through magic, but through stories, stories that continue to shape our understanding of history and ourselves. The eternal kingdom. So our journey ends here, in a land where the dead still speak, where stone remembers, where sand preserves secrets, where the sun rises over temples that once echoed with the footsteps of kings. Ancient Egypt may have faded from political power, but spiritually and culturally it endures. The pharaohs remain alive in art, in memory, in awe. Their golden crowns shine still, not on their heads, but in the imaginations of millions. And as long as humanity looks at the pyramids with wonder, the pharaohs will never truly die.